Hey, Mom.
Hi, Keira.
Welcome to For the Boys.
Right.
So-
I'm glad you're visiting.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm visiting too. We're here in Aiken and we've had a nice weekend and we've done some cleaning of your garage
Absolutely.
and some of the stuff. And we found some interesting things. And I thought it would be a good idea for us to sit down and maybe record an episode of For the Boys around some of the things that you know of from your family, and maybe some of the things that we found yesterday while we were cleaning your garage and stuff, and just kind of telling some of the stories of your childhood around horses, but also talk about specifically the artifact of the rocking horse that is near and dear to your heart.
Yes, really.
Yeah, but it has been in my home now for many years, which it always gets lots of great compliments and questions and stuff like that. And so I think I know the story, but if you could help me just make sure that I know the story and also tell the story for Matt, Kevin, and Liam, that would be great, about the rocking horse that is now in our house.
I think probably Matt, Kevin, and Liam don't know the back history of their great-grandfather, Harold Cook, nor their great-grandmother, Gertrude Cook.
Well, they know some. You know,
They know some, but they have probably no idea that there was so much about horses, especially in their great-grandfather Cook's family.
Right.
But getting back to the rocking horse, which always sat on the side porch of the Connell Farm south of Milton, Indiana.
And I can drop a picture of the Connell Farm in kind of right now so that we can see what that side porch looks like.
Okay. And it was a big old-fashioned farmhouse. And I was taken down there from the time I was born, and the rocking horse always sat on that side porch. From the time that I could probably be on my own, I was always on that rocking horse. I was horse crazy. And so I was always on that rocking horse. But at that time, the rocking horse that you see today was painted like coal black, and it had red runners, and it had a little leather saddle on it with iron stirrups. And the story that I was always told by my mother is that the rocking horse was built by a neighbor on a neighboring farm for my grandfather when he was very young.
Okay, so your grandfather, who is John Thomas Connell. So that's my great-grandfather, so that's the boy's great-great-grandfather. Okay, so when he was young.
Correct.
So that's, I'll have to go back, but that's going to be like 1870s.
Right. The Connells, my understanding is the Connells were on that farm for over 100 years.
Okay.
And I am just telling you what I remember, what Mother had to say.
Right.
Anyway, and as the years went by, I never forgot about that rocking horse. I loved it. And for some reason, when my Uncle John took over the farm, he took the rocking horse and abolished it out into a garage near the house.
Okay.
I went out always when I was down there visiting, and I would look for the rocking horse. And as years progressed, and I married, and I had Eric, I was determined that I was going to have that rocking horse for my kids. So ultimately, not only was the rocking horse abolished to the garage, it was abolished to the empty chicken house.
Oh, no.
Yes, which was my hated place, because when there were chickens there, I never went through there, or if I went through there, I was scared to death of the chickens. Anyway, but at one point I was down, after Eric was born, I was down visiting Mother and Daddy in Hagerstown, and I told Mother I was going to go get that rocking horse. And she was a little sort of shy about going down there and getting the rocking horse, but I guess I was kind of pushy, but I wanted that rocking horse for my children. So at one point we went down and I went out in the chicken coop. And
No chickens though.
No chickens. And it was the only time I was never afraid of the chicken. But anyway, and I rescued the rocking horse from the chicken coop. And it was, as you can imagine, a mess.
Yeah.
So we brought it back to Hagerstown and we cleaned it up. And Mother, there were so many memories and so forth for my mother that she was reluctant to give it up. And so it remained in Hagerstown.
Which is where I remember riding it,
Right.
on her front porch. And I think I'm going to drop a picture in here too of me probably 8 or 9 years old, and I have a broken arm. I remember riding that. I remember that moment though, having so much fun in that horse.
Right. And I have to admit I was not happy. And I was equally unhappy when she decided to make it better by, she literally took it up to the Amish in northern Indiana and they refinished the horse. They stripped all the black paint off of it. They took the saddle off, well, obviously to get refinish the horse. They refinished the rockers on it, and it is what you see today.
Still very pretty.
Very, very pretty.
But not in its original glory.
Not in its original. Yeah. And without the original saddle and all of that stuff. And actually, the tail of the horse, Mother went out to a gal that I had ridden horses with for years named Toby Halstead, and trying to remember what her married name is, but
all right.
Anyway, and Toby actually cut the tail off shorter on one of her horses and gave Mother horsehair so that she could use it, put it into, and I'm not sure if she did that before or after she took it to the Amish.
So on the horse, it's real horsehair.
It's real horsehair.
What about the mane?
I think the mane is too.
Right.
But it came from.
But I don't think the mane is on it right now.
I don't think there's any mane.
But there was.
There was a mane.
Yeah. Okay.
But the tail is from a local Hagerstown girl that I rode horses with all of my life. Oh, her married name is Toby Gordon now, but I knew her growing up as Toby Halstead. And she actually cut that horsehair from the tail of one of her many horses that she had when she was grown up.
Okay. So you eventually just took the horse, or did you wait until Grandma had passed away?
I did not get the horse until we broke up housekeeping in Hagerstown.
Right. After Grandma died?
No.
Oh, before Grandma died?
Yeah, I took her down to Cincinnati.
That's right.
To an assisted. She was with us for a while, and then she was in an assisted living home in a suburb of Cincinnati.
I just didn't remember when you sold the house in Hagerstown.
I'm trying to think when we did too, but we were already living in Cincinnati when that happened, so it had to be like 80. We went there in 87, so it had to be maybe 88 or 89.
Okay.
When that sold.
And then you had it, and then at some point in time, I don't exactly remember when, but somehow I got it. So.
Right. Well, in the move to Aiken, several things needed to be, you know, we just didn't have room for things. And you were living here in Aiken.
Right.
So the horse ended up with you.
Right. Well, I'm glad it did. It's a prominent place in our home, and we love it.
You love the horse.
Yes.
And I'm hoping one day the boys will love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kevin has actually said that he would like the horse sometime.
Well, then Kevin needs to know the backstory.
Well, that's why we're doing this.
Yes, exactly.
You know, before we leave this topic, so just going back to who made it and when. So again, it was when John Thomas Connell was a boy, and we think that a neighboring farmer,
Right, south of Milton.
south of Milton,
Indiana.
built it for him.
Right,
Okay.
as a gift.
Right. So we don't have any names
What
or
a
anything.
tremendous gift.
What a tremendous gift. And I'll figure out the timeline, but you know, let's say John Thomas Connell was 10 years old. You know, we'll be able to kind of figure out the timeline there.
And remember, I am relying on mother's memories,
Right.
which at the time she was telling me all of this, you know, her memories weren't the brightest either.
Right.
So, and I understand that now.
But that's why I'm doing this for the boys, is to make sure that we're recording these histories so that, you know, 20 years, 30, whatever down the line, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, I can't remember what mom said, you know,
Right.
what her mom said, what her, you know, grandfather said. It's kind of set in stone and recorded for prosperity. So that's why we're doing this.
Right. And the boys, like I said, they have no idea how prominently in one side of their family horses were,
Right.
you know,
And that will bring us to our next segment, but we're going to take a quick break and then take a look at some pictures. So
Okay.
thanks for telling those stories.
well, I wish I knew more about it, but, you know, I really do. And one thing that I do want to bring up right now is that ultimately, that great-grandfather of the boys, who the rocking horse was originally made for,
Actually, it would be great-great-grandfather.
great-great-grandfather, made his living as a blacksmith. And so he had things to do with the horses, always. And, you know, but also he was a wagon maker.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we'll have to talk more about that.
Right. And at the farm that we're always talking about, they had, when I was growing up, I think originally they had a lot of other horses, but the horses that I remember were Topsy and Nellie, and they were workhorses, and we always wanted to ride them, you know, but
Good.
anyway.
Awesome. We'll have to learn more about Topsy and Nellie at some point too.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
The person for whom the rocking horse was made is your great-great-grandfather. So here, Kevin, you are the home person today, and since this is on my side of the family, we're coming down in the family tree, and here's your grandma Betsy, and here is her mother, Gertrude Ann Connell, and so this is where, Liam, you get the middle name Connell, and so we're going to John Thomas Connell here. So again, it's you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents. And as we look at his profile, I was right. I thought he was born in the 1870s, so 1873, October 6th, in Milton, Indiana. Got a quick map of that. Milton, Indiana is right here. It is in Wayne County, which is just across the border from Ohio. And I'll zoom out here for a second. But I just want you to see where Grandma Betsy grew up is this Hagerstown. This is Milton right here. You may have heard of Richmond over here. But Milton is this teeny tiny little town. If you look over here on the left, it says in the 2010 census, there was only 490 people that lived in this town. So the farm that Grandma's talking about, I think is kind of down on the south side here, maybe off of this Highway 1. I know I've been by it many, many times. But just to show you how close it is to Hagerstown. So there's Hagerstown up there. And if we go out a little bit more, we can see that this is Ohio over here. So here's Dayton, Beaver Creek. That's where Aunt Diane and Uncle Ron and Maggie and Caitlin live. So it's really close around here, just about due, what is that, east of Indianapolis. But back here in the family tree, you can see that John Thomas Connell lived and died in Milton, spent his entire life in this small town. And his parents were Cornelius William Connell and Mary Callahan. Both of them were born in Ireland and came over to the United States in the mid-1800s. But I do want to take one quick look at this 1880 census. So this would be the first sentence that John Thomas Connell is in. So he's 6 years old. So remember, we talked a little bit about, he got this horse when he was little, that maybe one of his neighbors made it for him. So if we take a quick look here, in the 1880 census, here's Cornelius and his wife Mary. We've got Francis, John, and Elizabeth. John Callahan, who is actually Mary's brother, and Elizabeth is actually Mary's mother. So John here is 6, but I just wanted to take a look at some of the names that are around them for the possible makers of this horse. We've got I thought at first it said Britain, but it's Brattain maybe. We've got the Beesons here. Whoops. We've got the Mittendorfs, the Hensleys, the Millers, Dillon, Kidd, Farrell. Okay, we've got some people there. They are at the top of the page here, so I'm going to go on the page before to see the people over here too. So these are all the people that are around them. Other possible names are Millers, Jones, Ellis, is that Canby, Carr, Robbins, Ferguson, maybe Wallace, and Swafford. So those are potential families. Those are the neighbors of the Connell family, and that's when John Thomas Connell was young. That, potential people who could have made the rocking horse that we now have and love. All right, Mom, you ready to talk more horses?
Oh, always talk horses.
Cool.
Always.
Well, very good. Well, one of the things that we found yesterday in the garage when we did the big cleanup of the garage was this scrapbook, and you started telling me a little bit about the significance of this. So I'm going to hand it to you.
Okay.
And if you could just tell us kind of what it is and why you put it together, I think it's pretty fascinating.
As a little girl, I was horse crazy.
Really?
And,
Surprise, surprise.
Yes. And as every year, my dad and his buddy Gene Hutchison took a week's vacation and went down to Lexington, Kentucky to the Red Mile for one of the pieces of the Triple Crown in harness racing.
Okay.
And that was known as the Futurity.
Move that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Futurity. So anyway, he obviously bought me this scrapbook because it's in his handwriting. It says Miss Betsy Ann Cook. And I have put every year when he would come back from his week in Lexington, or in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's Lexington.
Lexington.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Anyway, I waited and waited for him to come home so I could have his program.
Oh, okay.
And it was a weekly program. It was always like this thick. And it featured beautiful photographs of the best of the best of the harness racing.
Wow.
And it was interesting.
Do you have any dates in here?
I don't.
You got some newspaper articles.
Yeah, but I don't know if the dates on it.
About how old do you think you were?
I was probably 8 years old, maybe 7.
There's lots of big pictures in there.
Yes, yes. And this was a highlight for me of the whole year. And Daddy used to take me to little things, like he would take me to the county fairs in Anderson, Indiana, and so forth. And in that era, they all had harness racing, even in Connorsville, Indiana, which was very close.
Right.
And I loved it. And Daddy got to be, or was, very well known in harness racing circles. In fact, in later years, Dan and I took he and Jean when they were older, and we went to the fraternity in Lexington. And through my dad, I was introduced to Norman Woolworth, who had known my dad for many years. And he owned a big harness horse racing farm called Stoner Creek Stud. But it was, that's how my love for harness racing started. And it's just another piece of the horse history in the Cooks.
Yeah. And it's maybe surprising, maybe not surprising that you now live in Aiken, which has its own Triple Crown, or at least did, right?
It does have.
And harness racing.
And they are starting to bring harness racing back.
Aiken used to have harness racing, but
they
no
had
longer
a harness racing training track.
Right, okay.
And then the city sold the track, and it just sort of disintegrated from there. Although now they're bringing it back. The last 5 years or so, they have had Mrs. McGee has added harness racing back into. It's not part of the quote Triple Crown anymore, but they have it like the week prior to the flat saddle races.
Right. So is that at McGee's Mile?
Yes, it is at McGee's Mile.
Nice.
And I just always, I love these, and so many memories
there's something on
of
this
my
page.
dad.
Oh, this, you put your name.
That's Mother's writing.
Yeah.
Here it says what it is, and these horses obviously long gone, but a lot of them, their lines are carried on because they were stallions, and their lines carried on, all the way up to, as I've told you, Keira, I'm following a horse, Legends and Memories they're called, and the saddlebreds horses, which are the big show horses, are related to standardbreds, which are the harness horses.
Well, this book I know has brought you a lot of happiness when you were younger. I can tell it's bringing you a lot of happiness now, and it's amazing that you've kept it. And I think that I'll take a few pictures of some pages to show the viewers here, but I'm glad we found this. I'm glad it's preserved as well as it has.
And I don't know, there's something back here. Let me just page through here a minute and see what this is. This is, it's a line apparently of this horse, which shows their big lines. And one of Daddy's best friends, a man whose name escapes me right at the moment, who lived in Eaton, Ohio, and Daddy and Jean and he always, in the later years, went to Lexington together. He was the man who chronicled all of the bloodlines for all of the standardbreds and the harness horses all over the country. And he was the person that put all these lines together.
That's amazing.
So
that's awesome. So thank you for taking some time to go through that with us. And like I said, I'll take some pictures of it. It's pretty fascinating. And
it really is.
It took a lot of time for you to do that when you were younger and now.
Oh, it was a labor of love, let me tell you. I remember sitting on the living room couch waiting for Daddy because, as I recall, it was always, they never got home because they always stayed that day's races, and they never got home until like 7 o'clock at night because it was a long drive then. They didn't have the interstates. And I would wait for him to come in the front door, and I barely could give him a big hug before I grabbed the program and started cutting out the pictures. So there I am.
So let's take another quick break, and then we can talk about your horse.
Oh.
And look at some pictures of you and the horses that you love personally.
Oh, yes. I really did. And I'm glad the boys are learning about this.
Yeah, me too. So here we are looking at a few pictures on the computer that I've been able to pull up from, PhotoMine or Shutterfly. But this is a picture, Mom, that shows you. And can you point to you?
Yes,
Yep,
I'm
that's
here.
you. So you're standing.
The horse lover.
The horse lover, that's right. But can you tell us a little bit about this picture and kind of the importance of this picture? Because you didn't have a horse at this time, right?
I did not. And I would follow these groups, and they were all girls who had horses, and they would all congregate somewhere or another in Hagerstown. And then as a group, they would ride all over town and the countryside. Nobody knew where we were, and but I would follow them and actually almost beg for rides on their horses.
How old do you think you are in this picture? I know we can't see your face, but how
I
old?
am probably 8 or 9.
Okay.
There. I was very tall for my age
Okay.
and everything. But this was my neighbor, Sharon Shelley, and this was a girl named Marcia Lika. And actually, this was Garland Rinker, whose daughter was riding one of these horses, and he had a daughter in my class in Hagerstown. But this is actually Toby Gordon. She was Toby.
Hems starts with an H.
Yeah. Anyway, Halstead. This was Toby Halstead then, and she was riding her grandfather's horse. But she is the one that ultimately donated the horse tail for the rocking horse.
Awesome. And so you were telling me earlier that that's your bike off to the left, and that you would kind of go chasing this group on their horses, like you said, maybe trying to beg a ride, but nobody ever knew where they were.
No, and I usually would hear about it through Sharon Shelley here, who was my neighbor,
Right.
and who actually was pretty good about letting me ride her horse every
that's
once
nice.
in a while.
So you wanted a horse desperately.
But I mean, when I say ride, I'm like, could maybe ride halfway down a block and halfway back.
Right.
And yes, I desperately wanted a horse, and I desperately wanted to be able to join all these crowds. And
Yeah. But then we have, I'm just going to flip to another picture here. Then we have this picture. So tell us the significance of this picture.
that's my Coco.
Okay.
I got Coco basically for my 10th birthday. And he was only 18 months old. But my dad went to a horse trader that was down south of Hagerstown. And he bought this little horse because I had seen him out in a pasture. And I kept pestering my dad at the kitchen table every night. And finally, I think he just gave up. and Coco came into my life on my 10th birthday. And he and I really grew up together. As 18-month-old, he was really pretty young for someone to be riding. But at that time, I would hardly weighed anything at all. And he was never, ever mean. He was the sweetest little horse. And, he never bucked me off. He never did anything. This is a picture. He was much more mature at that time. And actually, the picture is taken in an area of Hagerstown that we know as Teeter's Bottom, which a lot of horse shows were set up there in olden days. And it was a big grassy field where we could just ride.
Nice. Very good. So lots of great memories there.
Absolutely.
And what ultimately happened to Coco?
By the time I was like a senior in high school, I was not riding him nearly as much as I should. And he was just spending fun days out in the pasture with all his buddies, which he was stabled right down at the end of our street. And there were probably at least 5 other horses that were down in those barns. And one day, an ex-neighbor of ours came here for a visit, and his youngest daughter, Shirley, wanted a horse in the very worst way. And Daddy finally, I guess, got tired of taking care of Coco. And I was really, by that time I was working, and, I was working at Welliver's Smorgasbord, and I was dating, and I really didn't have a lot of time for Coco. And so Daddy said, well, I have Betsy's horse. And George Myers, who bought the horse, went down, and Daddy brought him up out of the pasture. And this is really funny because George was not a real likable guy. But Coco came up to him, Daddy, and Coco reached over the fence and nudged George in the shoulder, and George says, I'll buy him. And he bought him saddle, bridle, and the single horse trailer that we had for taking Coco to horse shows and stuff.
Oh, good. So he had a good end of his life.
And he went to Goshen, Indiana with Shirley. And then when Shirley grew up to the point where she wasn't riding him, they sold him to a farmer who was retired and was semi-blind. And he couldn't drive anymore. So he had Coco.
Oh, that's a great story.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing.
As far as I know, he died on that farm.
Okay. All right. Sounds like he was old and happy, though.
Right.
Very good.
He lived a good life.
Good.
Well, Mom, we're at the end of this episode of For the Boys, and it's been kind of fun taking it on the road. We're at another table in another person's house. Typically, we're at our house, but this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know that the boys are really going to appreciate these stories. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to them?
Yes, I'd like to tell the boys I love them very much. And I'm so proud of each and every one of them. And I wanted them to know what a background they had of just horse industry. And ironically, they were born in Aiken, South Carolina, which has a huge horse background and history. And somehow I ended up in Aiken, South Carolina, which also has a huge, like I said, history of what we call the flat saddles, which are the running horses and the harness horses and polo horses. And now the industry has grown for show horses, dressage horses, multiple horse industry. And so I hope the boys gain some interest in it and learn something about their background.
Well, I know I did, so thanks so much.
I loved it.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.